everyone, and welcome to the Birmingham Tech Week. It's been fabulous looking at all of the different speakers, and I'm really pleased that you could join me today. My name is Lee Lamb. I am the founder of the UK Startup Partner. We help with startups and small businesses with operational and strategic advice to grow the business. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you very much for joining me today. Just to bear in mind, I'm going to go through the presentation. There's quite a lot of information on there. There's a lot I want to pack in and give you guys. So I won't be taking questions throughout, but if you do have any questions, just please log them in the Q&A on the seminar, and I'll answer them at the end. If there are any that I don't quite get round to, then I will follow up with everyone as well. So thanks very much for joining me. As I say, we are part of Birmingham Tech Week, and we have a number of people to thank with the Birmingham Tech Week: Tech Nation, West Midlands Growth Company, and the Department for International Trade. They're all helping provide this wonderful event. We also have 2020 sponsors of NatWest, Copper, Culture Group, BJSS, Sidetrade, and BMet. And obviously there's a number of businesses who are also helping partner with that. And as you can see, there's some really wonderful universities on here, and some really brilliant organisations that are going to really help, hopefully, in getting everything done and ready for everyone else. And obviously one of the key partners, and why I'm here, is the UK Startup Partner. So as I say, we provide very operational advice to people, and hopefully what you'll find over the next few moments is a very basic run through of how you run a business. Now, it's not a typical tech seminar as you would normally understand it. Really don't go into any of the sales and marketing side, any of the promotion at all. What we try to cover is the actual running of the business, which is almost entirely industry agnostic, sector agnostic, because it's how you run a company is pretty much the same considerations for everything. So I want to take it through with you. It might be that some of you find some of the information quite basic. That's fantastic. But what I find when I'm talking to startups is that we assume that people will pick up the business side, that as long as you have a really good idea, that everything else about running the business, you can actually just learn on the go. You can, but it tends to be quite expensive to do it that way. And my thought is, if somebody else already knows how to do that, then you can fasten up your own process, speed it up, and get more successful quickly. So that's what we're going to be talking about today: how to run a successful business and feel like a success. We know that startups work incredibly long hours, as do most companies at the moment, for sure. But one of the things that we need to make sure is that in order to grow a company, one of the key factors is having time and space and brain space to actually become creative and think of the next iteration of your company. Can't do that if you're constantly juggling the operational aspects of it. So we're going to go through not only what you need to be considering, but also how maybe to factor that into your normal everyday life and feel like you have a life. So typically, startups will focus on their immediate requirements, and you might be very clear on these. You know, what is it you want to sell? How do you want to sell it? And who do you want to sell it to? You know, when we start up a business idea, understanding whether our idea has commercial viability is really important. So we start with that. However, there are two sides of your business. And sometimes if you focus too much on one side, it's the other side that actually starts becoming problematic. So we have the profit centers. This is how you generate the income. And we tend to focus on this to get the client base, to get the customers in, to start generating money. But the other side of this is your cost centers. So the operational costs of running a business. If you want to achieve the most profit you can, then you have to be able to maximize profit and minimize costs. It's not always as straightforward as just not doing something or doing something in the cheapest way possible. it might be that if you don't make the right considerations around how you spend the money, that the only way you can really achieve any balance is by continuing to sell more and more. And that might feel like you're growing, but it won't from the balance sheet point of view. So today we're going to cover three aspects, as I say. We're going to talk about what you need to run a business. So I'm going to be firing a lot of questions at you in terms of the things that you need to start thinking about. If you've got the answer already, great. If you haven't, then you can also just think about it as we go through. And if you have any questions, or you suddenly realize that, oh, I haven't thought of that, was that really as important as all of that, we can go through that as well. We're also going to look at how do you make time to work on your business. If you are particularly looking at some disruptive commercial interests, some disruptive tech, then that's what drew you to this business plan. Thinking about how you're going to manage your finances or how you're going to hire people may not feel as exciting, but you do need to make the time on it now so that as you scale, you can only improve upon that infrastructure. And then just to make sure that you have time for everything else. It's very common for startups to hit a certain level of success, and then the founder has to take a huge amount of time out to just get over the exertion. Now, it is a lot of hard work building up a business, and I don't want to say that there's a simple, relaxed way of doing it, because unfortunately there probably isn't. But if you don't somehow structure time into your schedule for relaxation, for time away from the business, ultimately it just eats up as much time as you give it. So you have to be quite disciplined. But again, if you do that when you're a small company, as you scale, it's so much easier to keep that within your routine. Now, one of the things that happens with operational issues in particular is it isn't the interesting part of a business, unless you're like me. So the tendency is to say, oh, I'll just give that to other people. So I'll outsource it. I'll bring in somebody who can help me with that. But there is a couple of considerations that you have to make when you think about moving your operations over to either third parties or bring someone in. As the founder, you will still have to know what they're doing and why. One of the most common concerns I have from small businesses is they have an issue with maybe the tax office, or they have an issue with the bank, and it turns out that something on their accounts isn't quite right. And there's a tendency to then say, oh, but my accountant sorted it for me. And it's not always understood that accountant's liability is actually quite minimal. As soon as you sign your company accounts, as soon as you agree to take action on the advice that they give, you own that task. So we run into a lot of difficulties where directors are held accountable for accounts that they can't read themselves. So even if you're going to move your operations over to somebody else, you have to make sure that you understand what it is they're going to be doing, because ultimately you're still going to be responsible for that. You also have to be able to explain the business to them. Even though operations is not client side, it's not what your customers will see, actually it still has a huge part to play in the culture that your company becomes. And so when you outsource, you want to make sure that they understand your vision, they understand how you want your company to be perceived and how you want to run your business. Again, if you're giving these items over to an expert, which may make a lot of sense, they may decide that there's a different way or another way of doing it that is not in line with what you want to do with your company. And so you have to make sure that there's a two-way conversation there, or you can lose track of the operational element of your business. So things to keep in mind. Look for scalable solutions all the time. So even when we're talking about operations, we want to make sure that as you grow, your infrastructure grows with it at the right scale and at the right pace. So typically you need to put the operations in actually almost before you start generating the income, which is the eternal problem of the startup. is that your energy, you want to be going to sell, but actually you need to make sure the infrastructure is there first. So it is a vital section of your business. So when you're thinking of putting in your operations, how do you scale this effectively? It's useful to remind yourself as well that there is no one size fits all here. Every single business owner will make decisions in a slightly different way based on their context, their drivers, their motivation. So even if there is a solution that thousands of people use, each one of those people will view it and use it in a slightly different way. And that's the same with business. So we don't necessarily want to make cookie cutter businesses here. It isn't about there is only one way of doing something. It's about understanding the various ways that you can get something done, and then making your choice as business owner as to the one that you're going to choose. This is particularly important because there is a tendency for businesses to look at other businesses to role model. And I think sometimes when we role model businesses, we think of that, this is the way they do it, so this is the way I'm going to do it. The problem is that context is different. You are a different person. And so when we talk about looking at other businesses to model, what we're talking about is, how do you think they made that decision? How do you think they made that choice? And how do you then apply it to your business and your situation? That's better than trying to copy someone else's model, because there might be a factor that really derails you and you can't come back from it because you never really understood the origins of that particular modeling in practice. So within the business, there are 4 main areas. Anyone who's worked in any kind of corporate will know these departments quite well. And maybe it might feel that startup is too small to worry about them. But ultimately, even if you're just a company of one, you're still actually doing the work of all these departments. So you have your finance department, HR, technology, and then operations, which is a blanket term for all of the other things that we have to do when we're running a business. What we're going to do is we're going to go through all 4, and I'm going to give you some questions to take away and have a think about on how would I answer this question? How have I thought this through? If you think about it, while you're a smaller company, you scale up with those assumptions built into the infrastructure. So you make better choices, and as you scale, the infrastructure is more stable. And it is a fairly common mistake that the startup thinks, I'm too small, I'll worry about it once I've reached a certain level of income, once I've reached a certain level of demand. The difficulty with that is going to cost you far more, because you're now unpicking something that wasn't right in the beginning. I'm just going to cough, excuse me. Apologies. So we want to make sure that there's some questions in there that you can answer while you're smaller. And even if they feel a little bit unrealistic at the moment, you'll thank me for them later as you grow and you've already done this hard work. So the first thing is your finance. So these first 2, I think, are fairly commonplace and ones you've already thought about. So how much money do I need to create the product or service I want to sell? So what are your manufacturing or origin costs? And how much am I going to sell it for? And what quantities am I aiming to sell for? So typically when we start looking at whether something's commercially viable, these are the 2 questions that we'll be asking. And they will get you to understand a certain level projection of a certain level of income. But there is a third question, and that's the other expenditure that you will need in order to run your business. Now, as a founder, you would have to put your salary, for example, as a running cost, because the business can't cope without you being there. So your salary wouldn't necessarily factor into those first 2 questions, because they're talking about the product and the sale. What you're going to sell it for has to be able to include all of those operational running costs. There can be sometimes a look at how much to charge something, and it's a true factor of how much it's cost you to manufacture, or you've looked on the marketplace and seen where similar competing ideas are in terms of price point. But if you don't run those numbers through not only how many you plan to sell, but also those other expenditures, you can really significantly impact the amount of profit that you can make. And particularly when you're trying to get investment, even though it feels as though the first two questions are the ones that they care about, that third question is really the game changer for an investor to think, yeah, this is a company who understands how to be a viable business, not just a viable product or service. So HR is the next one. Now, you may feel like you're far away from hiring other people, or you may be just about to do it. The questions still have to be answered so that as you get ready to grow and to expand, you kind of know where you're going to start with this. So how do you work out what staff that you need? You know, are you going to go for full-time employees, part-time employees? Are you going to go for contractors or freelance? Each one has a different set of assumptions when we think of operational considerations. So, for example, taking on a full-time employee, if you sign an employment contract, because there is an assumption in that contract that there will be ongoing employment, realistically, you have to have at least a year's worth of salary that you know is going to be achievable. So that if you run into problems later, you can still cover those costs. What we're seeing at the moment in the UK with the furloughing is that there's a lot of companies who are running out of money. And one of the prime risks that they have is that the funds to actually pay the people on furlough or the ones in the building is just not there. And you start running into a lot of difficulties in terms of maybe having to go into administration, which is unfortunately where a lot of companies are having to look at right now, because the cash flow has stopped their ability to pay their staff. So you definitely need to be able to forecast, and that depends on how you want to bring people on. If you have more temporary contractors, obviously those requirements go down a little bit, but you always have to factor in how much money you want for the entirety of the work that they do. If you can only afford a couple of months worth of salary, but the plan that you have for your product or service is maybe 5 or 6 months, then already you can see that it's problematic, and you may need to think of alternative funding for that. Once you know kind of what kind of staff you're going to bring on board, it's then about how you find them. So usually it would be a job board or a recruitment agent or anything like that. But more and more startups are finding their resources through LinkedIn, through small businesses, small business networking events, just their general network around. So think about how you want to find your staff as well, because particularly if you are going to go down the route of looking on LinkedIn for people or using recruiters even, those things are going to take building up a relationship. You're going to have a lot more success if you build a relationship with those people that you're ultimately then going to ask either to come and work for you or to find you the people. You need them to understand what your company is all about. So the longer time you give yourself to build up that network, the better. And then it's how will I manage and pay for them? So when you're taking on 1 or 2 people, particularly as a startup, there's a tendency to use those initial employees as almost they're taking on almost the same amount of risk as you are as founder, in that they're not working for an ongoing company at that point, and they tend to offer you far more in terms of their time and energy and resources. So you find that those first employees may be quite self-sufficient. They may get really on board with what you're doing quite quick, and feel part of the founders themselves. So you do need to think about that, because as you grow past that, then you might need to make some different considerations for those people who, you know, made the leap of faith initially. And typically when startups start scaling and they have operational issues, some of those issues come from the initial employees who now feel that their endeavours and their commitment haven't been reflected in how they're treated as the company has got bigger. It can be very problematic, and just a headache that you don't need. So thinking about that can really make a difference right now before you actually take those first employees on. How you pay for them, as I said, you do need to make sure that you can forecast. So if you're at a stage where you're not sure of how much income you're going to be able to generate over a 12-month period, then actually thinking that through and maybe keeping with freelancers or contractors for that little bit longer. Some people do decide to bring people on with equity shares and bonuses that are payable. So there's no salary payment there. It's just the promise of equity or profit share once the company is up and running. You can consider those, but there are some risks associated with doing that. And it doesn't necessarily stop there being a contract of employment. So you do need to be a bit careful of asking people to join on slightly different terms, and make sure that legally you're covered in any way that you need to be. Now, I realise that as part of Birmingham Tech Week, I'm probably talking to a lot of people who know all about tech, but this is the technology from inside your business. And I have dealt with quite a few tech teams who don't consider the running of the business at all and don't think about the technology that they use in order to get their tech product out there. So this is one of those things that hopefully these questions are very easy, but maybe not. So the first question is, what technology do I need and how would it scale? So if you know the infrastructure, the architecture that you're going to need to put in place, the next question is, how would you then scale that up? Now, a bit like, I think it's Moore's law, growth within an organization happens very rapidly. So typically when a company grows, you have a period of time where it feels like it's flatlining, that nothing is happening, and you're just not making any road into it at all. But then you hit a point, usually around the 2.5 to 3 year mark, where the market re-sees you as an established company. And that moment can really tip it. And once you tip, that goes very, very fast. So if you've been trying to make do with the tech that you've got, make do with the operations that you've got, in the hope that the growth will be slow and steady and you'll be able to forecast when that tipping point happens, it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So it is worth thinking about what you're using now and then formulating that same solution as larger scale and making sure that it would work. It's not necessarily that you factor all of that in straight away, but even just knowing, actually, this is only going to take me to this size company, and when I'm that size, I'm going to need to rethink this. That is still part of creating that startup strategy that you need to be able to do. So the software as a service is obviously a massive part of tech anyway, but in the startup world, it's become absolutely critical. A lot of companies now have most of their operations going through some form of software as a service, whether it's your accounting package or it's your CRM or even your web design. So thinking about how you're going to use it is really important, and how it scales. So understanding what the trigger points are for those subscriptions. Typically, you will find each package has 90% of what you need it to do. And then that 10% that is critical for your growth takes you up to the next subscription level. It certainly happened with Zoom earlier this year. Their free package is 40 minutes long for a free call. almost everybody in the world uses an hour for a meeting. So straight away you can see, actually, if I want that slightly longer hour, then I need to start paying. And that's how these packages are calculated out. So knowing what the triggers are, knowing if those things are going to be critical, can just help you plan for when you might need to bring out more expenditure in order to keep providing the service that you've got. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of systems, for example, CRM, they tend to offer a lot of features, and most of them would typically require somebody very dedicated to that task of putting that data in and keeping it all up to date. You know, a CRM is effectively a relational database, so it's only as good as the data in it and the connections that the data has made, and most of that tends to still be manual for a lot of it. So even if something is sold to you as a platform that takes away part of this operational pain, it's always worth reiterating how much you will have to actually do in order to get it to that stage. And that, because it can be more of a problem than a solution. So if you don't feel like you need a particular piece of functionality straight away, just don't use it. Wait until you understand what that functionality is for, and then scale up if you need to. And I guess I have a certain personal bugbear here for this last one. What do I want the technology to help me with? There are certain points in any business where human interaction is far more effective. So if you think of, there's a lot of AI chatbots that are now used on websites that try to mimic a conversation. The difficulty with that is we all talk slightly differently. We all use different terminology. And so most of the learning that the chatbots have to do is all the infinite ways that we can ask a relatively simple question. Also, if the person who's asking the question feels that they have a very particular situation, you know, their context doesn't really fit into the selection that they've been offered, it can get very frustrating. And instead of the tech being seen as helpful, it's seen as a hindrance. For me personally, I have a personal bugbear against when somebody is trying to pitch to me and I agree to take a call from them, and then they send me their link to their calendar. The reason for the conversation was that they wanted to speak with me, and then they're sending me to a piece of tech. They're giving me more work to do, even though they are initiating the call. It probably works for 90% of the people that they will want to talk to, but for those people it doesn't. It could be a missed opportunity for you to really hammer home your business and grow it in the way that you want to. So while I think the tech that supports what you do and helps you grow quicker is fantastic, you do need to really understand the demographic of who you're dealing with and understand where technology may actually cause more problems than it solves. The last point is operations. And as I said, it's a bit of a catch-all of everything else that needs to get done. So it includes things like your risk management and your business process management. So in traditional risk management circles, you'd be thinking of, what if there was a global pandemic and we all suddenly couldn't go to work where we normally do? What would we do if we had, there was an economic problem or a socio-political problem? With risk management now, a huge component of it is now reputational risk. We tend to think that we can control our branding. So what we want to show to the outside world is all that they will ever see. But thanks to the propagation of social media and various platforms that allow people to speak from within, how you operate your company is now just as visible. And you do need to factor that into mind. Companies like Uber had significant dents to their reputation because someone from their business, an ex-employee, spoke about how awful their HR processes were. And if you look at a lot of the companies that have had these immense rise and falls, when the fall happened, it wasn't because their product suddenly became useless. It's because operationally something wasn't working right. And whereas before that could have been covered up for a number of years and not really seen, now there's far more ability for people to go and talk about it. So it's definitely worth thinking about, the inside of your business is just as much of your brand as the outside. The business process management really takes it's something to think about when you're small, but it takes real significance as you get bigger, because you might start a process now that, as you're small, as demand is maybe lower, it's fine, you can cope. But then as you scale, does the process still work? Typically what happens in businesses is that we do something very hands-on, very manual, while we're getting to understand the process we want to follow. And then we're given maybe some automation along the way. And as we get bigger and as we get to scale, you may end up having to go through some kind of lean consultancy exercise where they come in and say, well, you're doing all these steps, but you don't really need to. I was speaking with a company recently who make a product, and the founder wasn't quite at the stage where he felt able to bring someone on to do the boxing up of the goods. So half his day was running the company and trying to find these bigger contracts, and half of the time he was putting cardboard boxes together and labeling them up. It took us breaking down how much time that was taking him, and then putting a price on that in terms of that's time that he wasn't available to get those bigger contracts, to go out and get the deal that was going to change the trajectory of his business. And once we understood that, it became far more obvious to him that it wasn't a saving to not have that done by somebody else. It was actually costing him a great deal of money. So understanding the process and seeing it for what it is can really help you make sure that you use your time in the right way. What needs to happen to keep the lights on? So keep the lights on is a term we used in the financial services sector quite a lot. It's not necessarily to keep the business at a sort of minimum run and keep all costs down. This is literally, how can you still say that you're trading? So during the pandemic, there was obviously a lot of companies that had to just stop trading completely. There was a particular issue, though, with companies that were set up as limited companies, because if a director put themselves on furlough, then they weren't allowed to run the company. They could literally do like one thing, which was a company secretary task. This obviously would cause huge problems. So that's not really keeping the lights on, because that person is needed to remain visible on social media, to keep in contact with their clients and so on. So understanding that absolute core number of what you definitely need to keep going can tell you your absolute bottom line. And that's the amount of money that once you have that for the next 12 months, you know that you're relatively okay. You're not going to go anywhere, which can give you a better sense of confidence as well. And it's about identifying the triggers on all of these processes, on all of these systems for when you scale. So what are your triggers for growth? Are you thinking about getting to a particular number of the products that you sell, the number of customers you have, maybe the footfall, the populations that come in through, how much money you have in the bank? Are you thinking that you will scale up when you hit a certain amount of money that's available in order to give a cash injection to another project or another product? And also now we have a viral. So I've worked with businesses who have had to grow literally overnight because of going viral on social media. It's not something that typical business processes like, because you have to move very, very quickly. And it's something to bear in mind, particularly if you know that part of your marketing strategy is to create a real social media presence. You know, the what if is really what if it works, and making sure that you can grow accordingly with it. And then the final part of the considerations of operations is how you're going to scale once you hit that trigger point. So does scale to you mean holding more stock? Are you going to produce more because you can now see and predict the demand better? Do you need a bigger unit, bigger premises, a second van if you're a trades van or something like that? Will you need to employ more people? So maybe you're thinking that the tech can actually grow quite easily without too much interference, but maybe that then generates some of this operational activity that needs to happen. So maybe you have to employ more people. The trick is to think modular. So think in terms of when I hit this trigger, that means I'm going to need one more person, I'm going to need 10 times more stock, I'm going to need another premises, another 1,000 square meters, whatever. Knowing that can help you scale up. So every time you hit that trigger, you know exactly what it is that you're now going to be looking for. That's particularly prevalent now, whereas people are looking to scale down, because it works both ways. If I don't get that volume of stock, if I don't get that level of sales, then I know that these are the things that I need to bring down in order to keep my costs under control. So by thinking modular, think of it like Lego bricks all piling together. You can take them on and you can take them off. It makes it easier to feel like it's in control and it's not running away from you. So now thinking more about finding the time to do all of this. As I say, it's not the most exciting part of why you would have started up a business, but if you get it right, you can kind of just leave it to its own resources and it runs and scales. But it's about asking those questions at the very beginning. So it isn't wasted time, I promise you, to be able to do this. One of the key things about working on your business is it's at that point that you really think about the strategy that you want to put in place. And that strategy is really what you end up presenting to financiers, clients, customers, investors, the public at large, because you understand exactly how everything is going to work together. So it's really not wasted time. It doesn't have to take up a lot of your time. Do the work while you're small so that you don't have to do the work when you're bigger. That will save you a lot of time, but also a lot of money, because the consultancies that typically help out once you're bigger ask a lot of money and potentially are going to tell you that some of these things that could have been set up now just haven't been. And do get yourself into the habit of having like a closing shop process, whether that's at the end of each day or the end of each week. It's really easy to just wake up in the morning and think of your business and go to bed thinking of your business. But by not allowing yourself a moment of reflection to think about how did that week go or how did that month go? What does it look like? What am I going to prepare for next week? That gives you a little bit of time to then either recheck your strategy and work out that you're going in the right direction, or give yourself time to change it around and adapt to whatever happened during that time. So having that as a disciplined point in time really does help you just keep on top of it all. And time management is the one thing that I think we all struggle with. And this, the Pomodoro Technique is now highly visible. I know tons of people who use it. I use it myself. And it is by far the best way of making sure that you always feel like each day is productive. Like I say, just because you're thinking about your business 24/7 doesn't mean to say that you're actually doing really effective work on it. And we actually know that if you can put some discipline around how you manage your time and what you focus on, you actually achieve far more. And then you do get to have a little bit of a life at the end of it as well. So this is for the Pomodoro Technique. Some of you may already know what this looks like. So everything is written down as a to-do list, a task that you have available to you. And you set a timer for 25 minutes. Now, the reason it's called the Pomodoro Technique is because the person who invented it happens to have a tomato-shaped timer with him. It is actually really important to have the timer showing, because it demonstrates and kicks in that part of our brain that says we're running out of time. Picture yourself 5 minutes till the end of an exam, and how sharp your mind suddenly goes in focus. You get the feeling, you get the idea behind what Pomodoro is trying to do. You work on that task, you turn off your phone, you turn off everything that you don't need, and you work on that task without any distractions for the 25 minutes. At the end of the 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break and you do something completely different, nothing to do with your work. And then after the 5 minutes, you come back, you do it all again, do that 3 or 4 times, and then you have a slightly longer break, and then you start the session again. If you do this way, in an 8-hour period, you can have around 6 hours of incredibly productive work. It doesn't feel like it because you're doing the 25 minutes, feels like it's no time at all. But actually, it's astounding how much you can get done by just telling yourself, the other stuff can wait, I'm just focusing on this one thing. To maximize its effect, you do have to keep a list of everything. So having a book next to you or a note on your desktop where every time something pops into your head that you need to do, you write it down. That allows you to then, when you're at your next 25 minutes, you can look and go, yep, I'm going to do that one. If you feel like there's something that's going to go over 25 minutes, try to break it down a little bit more, or just tell yourself, well, that's just going to take 2 chunks or 3 chunks of that time, but keep to the 25 minutes with a break. Otherwise, it kind of messes with the focus part of it. Alongside the Pomodoro technique, I personally use the Eisenhower method as well of prioritization. So these 4 areas are the type of headings that you put against each one of the tasks. So is something critical and urgent? You really need to get it done right now. Is it critical but not urgent? So you definitely need to get it done, but there's no urgency around it. Is it not critical but urgent? There are things that happen in life where it's not particularly important, but it is right now. It's an appointment that you can't miss. It's a telephone call you have to take. You have to put those down. And then not critical, not urgent. This is typically where emails are put, to be honest, particularly because they can distract us from the work that we do. So prioritizing everything in this way really, really does help. And then don't cheat on that timing. So keep it to the 25 minutes because it's really important that you have that sense of urgency that you have to finish in those time, because that's where the mind then really focuses down. So we've got you working 8 hours now rather than any more. Does this feel achievable? Probably not at this point, but we are trying to fit a lot in. There is very little point running a business and making it a success if you have no life outside the business. Even if it's something that you absolutely love doing, life is such a more deeper, richer experience if we're able to take that success and do something good with it. So being able to fit everything in really, really does matter. There are more than one way to run a business. So there's a lot of inspirational and motivational speakers who will talk about the need to live, breathe your business. Particularly a couple of years ago, that was almost the only kind of advice you were getting. And that sets some really bad habits, and particularly makes you feel bad if you just can't commit to that level of time or effort or energy. You do not have to wake up at 4 a.m. If I'm awake at 4 a.m., it's because I've stayed up. It's not because I've woke up. Wherever you are more effective, however you think that, when do you get your creative times during the day? When do you get your bursts of energy? Work with that. There's plenty of advice about waking up at 4 a.m. every morning. Equally, there's the likes of Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4-Hour Working Week, who his driver was to create a business that didn't need him constantly there so that he could appreciate life. So advice is good, but understanding how that fits with how you want to live your life and how you want to run your business makes a big difference. Remembering what or who you're doing it for is crucial. We sometimes get so bogged down in the detail and the game of getting a successful business up and running that we actually forget why we started it. And this is really important, because if you do this, then your business decisions won't be coming from a place of a holistic strategy. It's not going to be reminding you in the right way. And so you find yourself going off onto all these tangents, and you can get quite far down the line before you realize that you're going in the wrong direction. It's also great to motivate yourself to understand, what was my mission when I started this. Can be a great way to energize yourself in those weeks where, Monday morning comes and you just think, oh, is what I'm doing worthwhile? You look at why you started it in the first place, and you remember why it was worthwhile. And it is important to incorporate all of your life into your business plan. We typically have, this is a table that I use with my clients to help give a realistic view of how much time we really have. So business owners tend to think that we have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week available to us, but we actually don't. When I go through this with my clients, we say, shading the blocks of time where you're asleep, shading the blocks where you're eating, where you're having a shower, where you're taking exercise, where you're visiting people maybe. If you're a parent, there might be parent functions, the school run, all sorts of things. When you start doing that, you understand that, even looking at it now, you can probably say at least half of these blocks would actually already be taken up with something else. And this is why fitting it all in feels such a myth, because we think we've got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, when we haven't. We've only got probably 10 to 12 hours a day, maybe for 7 days a week for a while, until you burn yourself out. So you have to be quite pragmatic. If you want to fit it all in, then you have to make sure that you understand exactly how much time you have available, and then map what you want to achieve onto that, so that you can see it's achievable within the time that you have available, rather than what we can do, which is, oh, well, maybe I don't need as much sleep. Maybe I can miss out on the exercise. Maybe I can eat while I'm working. All of those things take a little bit of time, but actually end up with you feeling exhausted, and you don't actually get the benefit from it that you really want to have. Now, one of the things that I wanted to leave you with this afternoon is, if you do think about all of these things, and you work all of them out and you grow a hugely successful business, then we are quite used to hearing these interviews of very successful people. I'm sure you've heard some on the Tech Week calls that you've been on already, and probably further on. When they talk about their strategy and how they built their business, what I've noticed is a lot of the questions are around the operational things that I've been discussing this afternoon. So things like, what made you think of this business? What was it that you saw that was missing? How did you approach building the company? Now, there's a lot of people who will talk to you about the trials and tribulations, and there is this idea that there's a rite of passage, making mistakes along the way. Yes, there are going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that maybe looking back on it, you could do it better. But typically, the more you start preparing when you're small, the easier it is to actually build that company. And you don't have to go through a lot of failures if there is advice and guidance that you can get on the way. They might ask, what do you think was the biggest decision you had to make that launched your success? We think about this being that leap of faith into the marketplace or trying that new technology, but it could also be the way that you approach running a business. There's companies now that actually, the B Corp corporations, for example, those companies that have come out and been actively validated and recorded as having a real focus on how they do the business as much as what they do in the business. So something like that can really affect the way that you're perceived in the marketplace, and worth your time looking into. And as always, what one piece of advice would you give budding entrepreneurs who want your success? We look back on our time as we grow the business, and there will be mistakes along the way. There'll be success along the way. And there will be moments when you do get round to look around and see what you've made for yourself. That is the sort of the elixir of life for the startups that are coming up behind you. Even if you feel like you're at the very beginning of your step and your journey, there are people who are watching you and watching your progress. And so even the smallest decisions that you make around how you run your business can actually give you a greater sense of legacy than you can really imagine going forward. So I spoke at you for a very long time. There aren't any questions as I can see at the moment. If you do have any questions, let me know. You can also contact me via www.the-usp.co.uk. As I say, we do cover the operational side of the questions, running the businesses, how you put your pitch deck together, how you find investors. We deal with all sorts of industries, and we work on a subscription basis. So there's no long-term commitment at all. You pay for a month's worth of advice, and that includes a 90-minute session and then advice all through the week, all through the month, via phone, WhatsApp or email. So if there are any questions, oh, thank you. I just saw a thing. Thanks for a great talk. Brilliant. Do tell me if you have any questions. I know some of this sounds very basic and probably not within your remit. I know looking at some of the other titles that was around, I was like, oh, it's very specific. But my understanding of small businesses is that I've worked with so many of them now who just haven't had this explained to them. And if you have spent the last hour with me and you now have a better sense of the type of thing to think of, then my job's done and I'm happy. So thank you very much, everyone. I will stay online for a little bit longer just in case there are any questions. But other than that, have a fantastic week. And thank you for joining me on the Birmingham Tech Week.